This is my second time in Madison, Wisconsin, Madison. I was here for a panel 2 years ago, so I'm so excited to be back here because it's a beautiful campus. And it's also April, so the weather is a little bit more forgiving than other times of the year. So tonight I'm going to be talking about two things primarily. One, how I got to there. So it's talking about how my journey was unlike any other I've ever seen or heard of, and how I ended up there, which is quite unusual. And also rape culture, which is essentially my area of expertise and wheelhouse. And so I'm going to be getting into about a third of the presentation is unpacking what that means. What does it mean when you say rape culture? What does it mean when feminists are talking about this all the time? And why are they talking about this all the time? And why won't they shut up? By the end of this presentation, you'll know exactly what we mean when we're talking about rape culture. So this picture here is no thing. This picture was taken, I believe, in 2012, and I'm still in law school in this picture. So this picture I put as a cover shot because if you are sitting here and you're like, what am I going to do with my life? How am I going to make an impact in the world? Or if you're like, I want to do this one thing, but maybe I'll change my mind later. I am living proof that you can change your mind and still end up there, even before you graduated from your graduate school or even undergraduate. And so, like I said in my introduction, I'm a political analyst. Basically what that means is I talk about politics on television and on radio, and I analyze what's going on, right? So I'm coming from the left. And so I started out going on TV on Fox News. That was a good training ground for hotly contested debates, particularly when you're a woman of color in that space and coming from a lefty perspective. But I'm also a writer and clearly a speaker because I'm here. But TV and radio was essentially something that I just was watching. I was watching CNN or watching MSNBC. And I'm like, that limit is wrong. That limit is wrong. And I can do better. So essentially at some point, I was like, I want to do that. And so this part of my journey was figuring out how do people get booked on TV? How do they get on TV? And what jobs do they have? What degrees do they have? And how can I do those things so that I can also be on television? So that's essentially how my journey started. We're going to go through a little bit of the nitty-gritty of how I did it. So, like I said, this is me, again, this is recent though. This is Air Force One. This is when President Obama flew from DC to Selma in March, beginning of March. And he invited 5 black journalists, I was one of them, to fly on the plane during the trip, and then we had a Q&A on board. So I was like, real life House of Cards. A little bit, but a little bit more crazy because you're like, oh my God, this is like House of Cards, but it's not House of Cards, it's real life, that. A big part of the reason why I ended up in that space and in that meeting was because of social media. Without social media, I would not be here, I wouldn't have been there, and I wouldn't have been able to do nearly as much as I have been able to do just in a short amount of time, because social media and Twitter specifically I'm going to talk about is essentially your direct link to anyone. And so in my case, it was media. In my case, I wanted to figure out how to be the person who's debating Don Lemon or whoever it is on CNN. I want to be that person. So how did that person get there? Twitter is the way that you get there. Because even if you are in fashion design, every single brand and person of any sort of level of importance that you need to know is on Twitter. They're on Twitter, they're on Instagram, they're on Vine, they're on Snapchat, especially now. And so it's a direct line to anyone you want to talk to. So for me, it was media, but for you, it might be fashion. And so I would implore you, if you are not on Twitter, then you need to start today. But also, one of the things I did through social media is network. So then it was about meeting the people online and then going to meet them offline. And then networking with them at conferences and other places and spaces, happy hours for writers and journalists in New York City, or going to a conference for progressive bloggers and writers. Then I can not only meet elected officials, but other people that do the job that I'm currently doing, or editors that may hire me for the next position. So there's obviously you hear a lot of networking stuff when you're an undergrad, but maybe you didn't think that Twitter was a way that you would be able to do it. And I'm telling you that Twitter is one of the most effective ways to be able to do it. And then lastly, it's just freelancing. Obviously they listed a number of the places that I'm writing this period. But it really started out as a blog with my friends writing about politics. I worked on the Obama campaign in 2008 and wanted to continue, in the political space as well. Like I said, CNN and seeing them say things that were completely wrong was very inspiring for me to get into that space. I wanted to enter that space. So freelancing was one of the ways to do that. And then each time I would write a new thing, I would network with editors on Twitter and then find new places to write or get asked to write other things. CNN did that one time. That was one of the ways in which I broke into a mainstream space. CNN was like, we like your tweets about Cornel West, which, ironically, he's in the news again this week because he's having a little beef with Michael Dyson. It's like academia beef, but which I find funny. But I think that if you didn't realize that what you're tweeting or what you're putting on social media can actually affect the thought processes of people in the real world, hopefully after this presentation you'll believe that what I'm saying is the truth. Yes, going to sort of backing up to the basics of the methods of communication, the reason why social media is so powerful is not only because it helps start revolutions and organize people to rally around causes to protest. Obviously today in DC there's a protest for Black Lives Matter. That was largely organized on social media. Black Lives Matter, the hashtag itself was created by 3 women of color. You may not have known that. 3 women of color started the Black Lives Matter hashtag. And a lot of the organization around those protests are done on Twitter and using social media. And then documenting everything on Periscope or Meerkat, which are live streaming apps, or on Vine and Instagram. And that's what they did largely over the summer when they were in Ferguson and all of the media was sort of focused on this one thing. But even though you haven't seen them on CNN every night, they're still organizing on social media. They're still organizing, they're trying to get, there was a recent election 2 weeks ago in Ferguson for the local offices, city council and the mayor, not the mayor, city council races in Ferguson. And so social media, even though you're not seeing it every day on television or in headlines, is always working. So for me, it's not just about being on Twitter, it's also about how to use it strategically. So for me, it was all about trying to find influential people to follow me back. So that was like the #1 goal. It's like if Rachel Maddow is following, she has millions of followers. She's just one example. But she's not following that many people because Rachel Maddow probably doesn't spend a lot of time reading Twitter. She's Rachel Maddow, so she's being Rachel Maddow, right? And so one of the things I realized early on was like a lot of celebrities in particular, they follow a lot, or they have tons of followers, millions of followers, but they're not following that many people. Maybe they're following their assistant, their publicist, their agent, maybe their 4 best friends, and like other people that work with the record label. There's like 100 people, maybe max, 200 max, that people that are super influential are following. So what you're thinking about is trying to get into their network. That's what Twitter is, and that's what I think about when I think about the influential people and who they are following. I think about how can I get into their network? Because I not only want that person to follow me, I not only want Rachel Maddow to follow me, I want everybody that Rachel Maddow is following to follow me as well. Because they also need to know who I am, they need to read my work, and it would be cool to have them sort of see who I am, get a sense of who I am, and then also see that I do this political writing. And look at that, that's a career opportunity that was easily gained just because of who you strategically choose to follow. So I'm actually also going to play a video in a moment, but this is when this is 2 years ago, before the 2012, 3 years ago, before the 2012 election, time flies. And this is when BuzzFeed decided to go out and make a list of people that are breaking into the conversation about politics around the election in an untraditional way. Non-traditional way, that's not even a word. Non-traditional way, right? And I was one of those people, right? Because I'm coming at it, like they said in the intro, I have a degree in international relations. I went to law school. I didn't go to school in order to become a political pundit. I went to school and got trained to be a lawyer, but then decided, lawyers don't look very happy. I wouldn't be happy. I'd much rather stand up here and talk to you than sit at a desk and read documents. And so for me it was, midway through law school being like, I don't think I'm going to be a lawyer at the end of this. But what could I do? What gets me up in the morning? What gets me excited? And politics is one of those things. It's one of those things where like my voice speeds up. When you talk about something you're really excited about, and you love it so much, you get really excited, your voice gets that tone in it. That's what happens when we talk about politics, right? You get all excited. Especially now, Hillary Clinton's running, we got gender. It's going to be like amazing, right? Especially for feminists. It's like, we're going to have a lot of talk now. We're going to have a lot to talk about. And working at a big law firm, you know, when you kind of do that analysis, it doesn't necessarily come out on the side of, I'm going to be doing good in the world, right? So for me, it was trying to figure out how I could use the skills that I got in law school to do something else. And Twitter was one of the ways in which I started experimenting and figuring things out. So BuzzFeed actually, and this is the actual snark came about when the Republicans tried to shut down the government over funding for Planned Parenthood. You can probably forgot that because they actually shut down the government subsequently later, like a year later. They really shut down the government. This one they were just, you know, faking it. They were faking us out, pretending like they were going to shut down the government. And they were actually, they put funding for Planned Parenthood on the table. They were like, agree to this, and we won't shut down the government. And the president was like, get the F out of here. He didn't do that. But that's basically what he said. But the Republicans essentially were trying to use funding for Planned Parenthood and the government shutdown sort of game of chicken to address their pet issues. And so, I mean, I really have a problem with like only men in a room deciding my reproductive rights. I think that's a scary thought. I don't know if I can feel it. But that was a lot of what was going on at the time was people tweeting and reporting about this conversation that was happening with the congressional leaders and the president. And the women actually in the Senate revolted at this point over this time. So I'm going to play a short, very short, like 2 minutes, video about how I got on this list. And it's me talking to the editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed. Let me just pull it up. It's all queued up, so it should be good.
I'm Ben Smith. One thing we've noticed here at BuzzFeed this election cycle is the way in which a group of real outsiders have managed to break their way into political conversation using Twitter and both interacting with and influencing the people.
Anybody know why the video is there a tech person?
Funny to drag it to the other.
Drag to the other window? I have a map, so somebody help me out real quick. Let's see. Apologies. Yeah, I'm like, I don't even know. There's different things. Oh yeah. Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you. Teamwork. Teamwork. Yes. Teamwork. Now I don't get back to it. I don't know how to press play though.
There you go. You got it. Right. There you go.
We're going to traditionally control that conversation. Reporters, operators, politicians. And the people who've broken through range from a 21-year-old New York, Pennsylvania to well-compensated lawyers in New York City who are writing anonymously because they don't want to get in trouble with their jobs, to folks like Zerlina Maxwell, who's a law student at Rutgers University. She set out with a very deliberate plan to break into the political conversation, who has succeeded on Twitter, so you'll start to see her on cable news and with prominent freelance gigs. And she came into BuzzFeed today. The first thing I asked her was how she did break through.
Essentially, I worked on the Obama campaign in 2008, and I was a field organizer. So I went, it was like right at the bottom, it was not glamorous, I was sleeping under my desk, everything, felt that whole, normal field organizer life. And I moved back to New Jersey after we won in 2008, and I was like, how can I continue to be a part of this political engagement? I mean, how can I, keep staying involved? And essentially, blogging was the way I was going to do that. And obviously the natural progression from writing on a blog and moving to write on Twitter is very much the same. You're just sort of breaking your little blog posts into little pieces. And so I just started tweeting.
Did you ever, was like there a moment when you felt like you broke through? It was like, oh my God, it's got so many retweets, so like this person retweeted it, right?
When I knew that I probably was breaking through was when I got a direct message from a CNN producer based on something that I was tweeting. To write an op-ed. They were like, we want you to make this into an op-ed, and it really was just, it was a Cornell list, pretty much saying some very negative things about Melissa Harrisbury, and essentially I disagreed, and so I sort of went on a little rant, I would call it, and they, DM'd me, we would like you to write a full op-ed about this, and so that's really how I've been able to fight my way in. It was a conscious effort, it wasn't an accident. I made a strategic choice that I'm going to follow these specific people. I would pick maybe 10 people that I really admired and looked up to in the field of journalism and writing, and I followed all their followers, and some of them followed me back, and that's how I gained more followers, but also gained more influential followers.
We put together a list of some of the most prominent of these outside
of that and the brand of that particular outlet. So one of the places that I chose strategically was Feministing. And so the last time I was here, actually in 2013, I was on a panel with one of my Feministing colleagues talking about feminism and blogging. But Feministing was an incredible opportunity and space because not only is it the most widely read feminist publication on the internet ever, it also, the White House reads it, media bookers read it, radio bookers read it, editors from mainstream publications read it, or at least know what it is and what kind of work comes out of Feministing. People have gone from Feministing to become best-selling authors, like Jessica Valenti, the founder. And so part of going into Feministing was because I wanted to be able to talk about personal experiences with race and gender. I wanted to talk about sexual assault and domestic violence. And I wanted to do it in a space that not only was safe to do it, right? Because you can't do that in every space. You're not going to go on like BuzzFeed, or some gossip site and write about your personal narrative with X, right? You want to go to a space where they're already used to that sort of voice, but also that it's safe, so that you're not getting, attacked constantly. You want an audience that is receptive to your message. So Feministing was one of those places for me. And this is actually one of the most read posts that they ever had. It was a silly post that I was watching Hillary Clinton testify to hearing in front of all these men, and they were like ranting and raving, and her body language was amazing, right? It was very instructive. And I think that, maybe the women in the room can sort of nod and attest to this, but like mansplaining, that's the thing. That's the thing that we can deal with. And so I sort of watched Hillary Clinton deal with sort of the most epic mansplaining. This was Senator John McCain, right? It's like, it's in the Senate, there's no women, they're just like ranting, he's going on this rant, and she's just like moving stuff around the desk, and she's like looking down, and she's kind of like fixing her hair, whatever. It's all good. I mean, her body language was amazing, but it was also really instructive of how women, generally, have to deal with this all the time, in every sort of situation, particularly professional ones, where you might be in a meeting and you'll say something and no one pays attention, and a guy will say it and they're like, great idea, and you're like, I just said the same thing, said that. Or you get a situation where some person, sometimes it's mostly a man, I'm not bashing men at all, but I'm just sort of saying this is the thing that you do. Maybe you weren't aware, so stop after today. You're explaining something to a woman that they already know, something that they're an expert in, and you're not. You're like, you see, the thing about childbirth is da-da-da-da, and you're like, are you a doctor? Anyway, so mansplaining is a thing. It's feminists, we talk about it all the time. So Hillary Clinton did this thing at a Senate hearing, which I found not only funny, but also instructive and sort of informative. So I made a post about it, and it went viral, like completely different, like went viral. And I think that she actually saw it. I know that people around her saw it, and they really liked it. So I'm hopeful that she also saw it as well. But so, yes, combination is, the formula is Twitter, networking strategically, but then also finding places, if writing is your thing, it may not be. But if writing is your thing, finding those spaces in which you can be a leading voice on issues that you care about. And that's one of the things that I did. So Feministing was one of the places that I did that. The other thing that I did is I went to conferences, a lot of conferences, all the time, for people like me. So people that, are progressive and they write, do a little activism, they advocate for certain issues. It was fine. I mean, there's conferences all over the country all the time. I know some people actually get jobs as Uber drivers just so that they can go to like tech conferences all over the country. And then while they're in the city that the conference is in, they're an Uber driver so that they can make a little income. That's how people are funding sort of this kind of lifestyle. And I found that so sort of refreshing because I think that conferences are, number one, a great way to network. But then what do you think you're doing when you're not in the same physical space? You're tweeting at each other, you're messaging each other, you're continuing to build a relationship. And so Network Nation is one of the conferences, one of the first conferences I went to for progressive writers and activists and organizers. It's like a kind of a tech conference, a little nerdy, but it's also a place where presidential candidates come every single time there's a cycle. The vice president in there, Elizabeth Warren spoke at Networks every single year, all the way up to the president. So she was speaking on Networks panels, and she was a law professor before she was even elected to the Senate. And then this is, it says at the bottom, this is 2013. I've been going to Networks, I think, 4 years at this point. And they did a plenary session with Nancy Pelosi, and they asked a feminist writer to misconceptions as opposed to the way in which you can facilitate the tools on the internet to do it when you're not in the same physical space. You're missing out on a whole area that can be very effective. So the next thing that I did was go to conferences and networks with one of those conferences. Obviously, we know this. It's sort of a review slide. But we know the ways in which we use social media. But one of the things that I think is like more about, it's more than finding, the kid you were friends with in second grade. It's not really about that anymore. It's about using it as a tool strategically to network. That's the way I think of it. It's a direct connection from me to anyone that I want to talk to. And I mean anyone. And you see that this is true, maybe a little bit less so with high-profile celebrities. But celebrities still are, you can tweet at, maybe not Kim Kardashian, she might not read your tweet, but, Rihanna certainly tweets at some of her. Sometimes not so nice, but certainly, I mean, one of the things that is clear is that people are reading their mentions, even if they're Rihanna. So, anyone, I mean, like, this is a presentation about leadership, but I don't even believe in sort of the traditional models of leadership, like, I want to be head of this organization, and then I'm the in-charge person of this organization, and then I'm the leader, right? That's not, I just don't think that traditional model is, I don't know, not that it's not relevant, but I would say that it may be an old model, because I think that anyone can be a leader, anyone can be a leading voice. And because we have these tools like Twitter and Instagram and Vine and Periscope that you can live stream anything, so if you're going to the Black Lives Matter March in DC, you can live stream it to all of your Twitter followers in real time. That seems to me to be something that will really change the world in real time, and you didn't even maybe realize that tool was, or the ability to do that was there for you using these tools. So, like I said, anybody can be a leading voice on an issue, and most people have cell phones, so it's like, you don't need any high-tech equipment to be able to do this. Anybody can do this on your phone. You can do it. I mean, you can get the Twitter app, you get Periscope, and then you're good to go. Maybe you get Instagram for some fun, fun lifestyle shots, and then maybe you strategically use it to network. And I noticed that when I speak at schools, for example, I get a lot more Instagram followers because your age group. I'm also a millennial as well, but more so your age groups, you're overrepresented on Instagram and Vine, as opposed to Facebook, where my mother is. And also, too, women of color and historically marginalized groups are overrepresented in all these social media sites. So what does that mean? That means that Black women or Black trans women that have for so long been ignored, their voices have been ignored or co-opted, I'm able to say exactly what I want, and it'll be on my feed. And because Rachel Maddow follows me and all the other people,